Thank you for coming in this lovely weather. This is panel 3 on the topic of translators. And I'm Kaori Ashizu from Kobe University. I have the privilege of chairing this session. First of all, I would like to explain the schedule of this panel, as we have such a limited time. So we'll hear 3 talks first, and then have question discussion time afterwards. So speakers, please keep strictly to your 20 minutes so that we do have time for questions. And in the question time, I invite questions either to individual speakers or to the panel as a whole. And of course, you speakers may have questions for each other. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. I'm delighted to be introducing Dr. Wu from National Chengchi University, Taiwan. And he works on the translation studies. And he published in the Wenshan Review Concentric Frontier Studies, Emily Dickinson Journal, Review of English and American Literature, amongst other things. Okay, thank you. Can you start?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. As you can see on the screen, my name is Li-Hua Wu, and I'm from Taipei, Taiwan. Taiwan is not very safe now, not only because of typhoon, but because of military exercises there. So, okay, my topic is representing the poetic styles of Hamlet in equivalent Chinese, Peng Jinxi's literary translation of Shakespeare. Originally, the topic submitted to the conference was the first one, the one on the top. It focused on annotation and the scholarly dimension of Peng's translation. However, in the process of preparing for the presentation, I found that poetic styles and the literary dimension might be more interesting. So I slightly changed the focus and changed the title. The focus is the same on Hamlet, on translation, and by the same translator, Peng Jinxi. Now I will proceed with my abstract. As a professor emeritus of the Department of English, National Taiwan University, Peng Jinxi has dedicated his lifetime to literary translation and Shakespeare studies for more than half a century. His Chinese translations of Shakespeare's plays are adopted by local Taiwan drama companies for their outstanding lingual performability on the stage for the audience of our times. The paper seeks to explore how Peng manages to render the various Shakespearean poetic styles of Hamlet into equivalent, readable, and performable Chinese language. First, the investigation will focus on the way Peng resorts to sophisticated domestication strategy in translating proper names of the play into corresponding Chinese character names that are in most cases highly revealing of the character's essential roles, as well as dramatic functions in the play. Second, the research will probe into Peng's spatial literary expressions in the Chinese language, a language that hallmarks formal and semantic fidelity to Shakespeare's original rhetoric and poetics. Altogether, I argue that Peng Jinxi's Chinese translation of Shakespeare's Hamlet features a dual contextualization with which he attempts not merely to represent the original poetic styles of the play, but also to incarnate the poetics of Chinese literary convention. These are the key words. In the first section, I will deal with the rendition of the title of Hamlet itself. So Peng's Chinese title of Hamlet may appear peculiarly eccentric to the majority of his readers, while other Chinese translators have rendered the title of Hamlet into 哈梦雷特、天仇记、哈姆雷特、汉姆雷特、汉梦莱特、汉姆莱特、哈姆莱特、哈姆里特, etc., or even the most straightforward cinematic rendition of the title as 王子复仇记, literally records of a prince's revenge. It seems that Peng has taken liberty to render the title of Hamlet into harmony with only 3 Chinese characters in the titling, which is a bit quite new and quite special, even strange for Chinese audience. However, there's a certain logic behind the translation. Here, I would like to quote Naida and Tabor. I resort to their concept, okay? From formal equivalence to dynamic equivalence. The older focus in translating, according to them, was the form of message, and the translators took particular delight in being able to reproduce stylistic specialties, e.g., rhythms, rhymes, plays on words, chiasmus, parallelism, and unusual grammatical structures. The new focus, however, has shifted from the form of message to the response of the receptor. Therefore, what one must determine is the response of the receptor to the translated message. This response must then be compared with the way in which the original receptors presumably reacted to the message when it was given in its original setting. So it's based on this kind of change from formal equivalence to dynamic equivalence. As showcased in the foregoing analysis, Peng's rendition of Hamlet into only 3 Chinese characters, Ha Mu Lei, demonstrates not merely his attempt at textual formal equivalence between English and the Chinese titles, but also his deliberate effort at performing dynamic equivalence between English and the Chinese utterances of the title character on the stage. Then, now I would like to mention another very important translator in the Chinese-speaking world, whose name is Liang Shiqiu, a renowned and authoritative translator of Shakespeare's complete works into Chinese. So expressed his principles regarding translating Shakespeare's proper names and the geographical names into Chinese. He says, I try my best to render Shakespeare's proper names and the geographical names according to their original, actual pronunciations into the Chinese language. I would not trouble myself to sillicize these names into traditional Chinese ones. In fact, such a transliteration principle has been largely adopted by the majority of Chinese translators of Hamlet. In a similar vein, Peng Jianxi himself also follows the principle of transliteration, that is sound translation, in rendering most Shakespeare's characters' names into the Chinese language. However, he differs from other Chinese translators in that he intends to endow more profound semantic signification for the Chinese names of important characters of the play. For example, Peng renders Fortinbras, the name of the young crown prince of Norway, into Fu Ting Ba, a Chinese name that does not only represent the original English pronunciation of the character's name, but it also conveys the semantic significances as embodied in the etymological craftsmanship of the playwright. The name Fortinbras is itself a French etymological combination of fort, which means strong. I think Sarah can be our witness, right? So, is Sarah here? Strong, right? Yeah, Sarah's not here. Sarah speak French because he's from Université de Montpellier. And then bras means arm. So thus the name Fortinbras stands for a dramatic figure whose arms are strong in a symbolic sense of the word. In this play, Fortinbras is not only strong in physique, but he is also very strong in his will of action, conquest, and revenge. In contrast, Hamlet, as a character's name, etymologically signifies a small village that is serene and tranquil, and a small hen with the French suffix lit that signifies small or smallness. So you can see the contrast in the naming by Shakespeare. The scholar translator attempts to make the most out of his Chinese rendition of Fortinbras into Fu Ting Ba. Perfect or ideal fidelity to his original pronunciation aside, the 3 well-chosen Chinese characters, Fu Ting Ba, altogether reveals the fact that Fortinbras is not only the one who resets the order of the chaotic court of Denmark, but he is also the one who finalizes the mutual international hostility across generations to reign the warring countries at the end of the play. Then in the third section, I would like to talk about the rendition of blank verse and the rhymed couplet. So the rendition of blank verse, of course, is very, very difficult and very, very complicated, as mentioned by director Ado in our meeting of last evening. Okay, so here we can see a certain passage accepted from Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet. And you can see in this passage, the lines are not rhymed, okay, from the beginning till near the end. All the lines are rhymeless, they are not rhymed. Only the final two lines, they form a rhymed couplet. And according to Shakespeare's stage device, this kind of couplet at the end of a long blank verse functions as a device to cue the other actors to act, to signal that this is the end of the very long speech in blank verse. So the translator tried to be as faithful as possible to the original form of Shakespeare's verse, that is in iambic pentameter, but it's in a very flexible manner. So they are not always in strict form of the so-called blank verse. Okay, iambic pentameter. So you can see the flexibility in the number of lines. If I have made some mistakes, you may want to point it out because you are experts and scholars of Shakespeare. And this is according to the articles that I read, in which the authors pointed out that the usage of blank verse by Shakespeare is quite flexible, so long as there are 5 stressed vowels in the right position in every line. And this form, that is blank verse, and that is flexible and without rhymes till the final 2 lines, is faithfully represented in Pang's translation. Here you can see the translations are done within a reasonable range of character numbers. The length of character numbers range from 10 to 12 in this passage. And you can see when the original lines are not rhymed, then in the Chinese translation, they are not rhymed either. And in the final 2 lines, the original English is well rhymed to form a couplet as a stage device. And here in the Chinese translation, this device is faithfully represented and translated by the author. So you can see the translation between the 2 Chinese characters marked in red color. And about the style of the language, it's not too contemporary, not too vernacular, and not too ancient. So for the phrases that is in bold font and underlined, they are considered more classical Chinese language. And for the rest, they are more modern, more contemporary, and more easier, so-called vernacular. So here we can see a certain mixture, mingling, blending of ancient classical style and contemporary vernacular Chinese. And this blending is meant to achieve also flexibility, to show the form. The form is, there's a certain form that has to be followed, but this kind of form is not absolute. And this is Pang's translation. So in terms of overall effect, the connotation of finality revealed in Shakespeare's rhymed couplet is not limited to the blank verse of his plays, but it is also applicable to his sonnets. How much time do I still have? Yeah.
I wasn't free.
So,
Probably you have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? All right, so thank you. So here it means that couplet has a certain connotation of finality, not only in the play, in the blank verse, but also in his sonnets. Okay, and this is also observed in the Chinese translation, and also in the rendition of the prose verse. The translator also tries to be as faithful as possible to the original lines. So here you can see there is repetition of syntax of exclamation, and there are repetition of words. For example, what, how. So this kind of syntax, repetition of syntax, and the repetition of wording are faithfully presented in the Chinese translation by Peng. So you can see the syntax are as succinct as the original one, as repetitive as the original one, and the wording, repetitive wordings are also rendered, also represented in the Chinese translation. So apart from highly philosophical soliloquies, Hamlet, the melancholical meditative Grand Prince of Denmark, stands out amongst other characters even when he addresses others in a prose style. And this kind of particular prose style that is considered like verse form by the Shakespeare scholars is also observed in the Chinese translation by this translator. And now in section 5, I would like to talk about the rendition of soliloquy. And similar to the translation of Shakespeare's blank verse, the translation of soliloquy in the Chinese language, Peng also tried to be as faithful as possible regarding the form, original form, and the rhyme or rhymeless in the Chinese language. So when the original is not rhymed, then his translation in Chinese is not rhymed. When there is no couplet, then there is no couplet. And for the length of the line, it's within a certain reasonable range, but it's also a bit flexible so that the form can be felt by the audience, by the Chinese reader, but it's not too rigid, because there are other translators who try to set a certain rule for himself and try to translate every line with 10 syllables, 10 Chinese characters. And the result, the spirit is quite respectful. However, the result might be very rigid. It may end up with unnatural Chinese language. So this translator try to be faithful and flexible in the same time. And then I will move to my conclusion. All right, so Peng's rendition of Hamlet features tripartite efforts. First, he devotes himself to rendering the original text with a literary expression that takes Shakespeare's multiple textual aspects into consideration. Second, the translator has to tease out the nuanced relationship and the artistic correspondence between Shakespeare's art of characterization and his artistic use of dramatic language across a wide lingual spectrum. Thus, he is able to render any English passage into a rather equivalently domesticated Chinese passage, one that not only features formal equivalence, but it also reflects the subtle Shakespearean connection between his art of characterization and his employment of lingual register. Third, the translator has to engage himself in academic research in the field of Shakespeare studies and keep abreast with the global academia so as to endow his Chinese translation of this most multidimensional play with sufficient and the most up-to-date academic annotations. And this is the end. And this is the certain image, the photo of the translator, who is who is about 79 years old this year. And this is the translator on the left-hand side, interviewed by another translator on the right-hand side. And this is the end of my presentation. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. So our next speaker is Professor Masaru Inoue from Meiji University, Japan. He published extensively on the theatrical history, theatrical theory, and also Shakespearean productions in Japan. Today he is going to speak on the topic of Kinoshita Junji's unpublished first Hamlet. how we solve the problem are we?
I think the easiest way is to change the setting of actor to make it mirror.
How to protect the
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for your very kind introduction, Mr. Aziz. Thank you. And I'd like to start my presentation on the title on Kinoshita Junji's published first Hamlet. Maybe you know that you read the title on the leaflet, maybe the Hamlet's first story. Kinoshita first monologue of Kinoshita Junji's unpublished first Hamlet. I changed my title, I'm sorry. So I will read my paper. This paper aims to explore the uniqueness of Kinoshita Junji's unknown first translation of Hamlet in 1956, which may suggest a counterfactual development and alternative possibilities of importing Hamlet into the post-World War II Japanese stage. He is Kinoshita Junji. The name you may remember because last night's session of Professor Shimodate Kazumi introduced him as his own guiding light to adapt his own version of Shakespeare. Kinoshita, playwright, novelist, researcher of English literature, is also known as one of the distinguished translators of William Shakespeare's works in Japan. He translated 16 plays of Shakespeare, and they have been read widely for over 70 years. But strangely enough, little of them has been produced on Japanese stage ever since, though his own dramas have been staged on so many times, and he has been considered as one of the most important playwrights in modern Japanese theater. Kinoshita published his first Shakespeare translation, Othello, in 1947, but his next one, Hamlet, published in 1971. During this period, Kinoshita exclusively wrote many plays known as his masterpieces and taught dramaturgy at Meiji University. These lost years of his translations may be one cause of the absence of the stage history of the production with his Shakespeare translations. Again, it is quite strange that Kinoshita had almost nothing to do with Japanese Shakespeare productions because he had been exploring the explanation of lines, i.e., how to evoke Japanese speech effectively, especially on the stage. The achievement of his exploration of exclamation can be seen in the production such as Requiem of a Great Meridian, 四五線の祭り, a sort of history play based on the tale of Heike, Heike Monogatari, an epic ballad succeeded for over 700 years. Requiem on the Great Meridian is a mixture of drama and narrative of group reading of extract of the tale of the Heike. And elocution of lines plays an important role in the production, which achieved a great success and has revived many times. Its success also derives from his lifelong exploration of declamation of Shakespeare's line in Japanese. But it is almost unknown that during this lost period, Kinoshita translated and adapted his first Hamlet for a series of radio programs featuring Shakespeare's masterpieces. Kinoshita himself did not mention it anywhere in his own writing, so this script has been almost forgotten ever since. As far as I know, only Kume Akira, actor and narrator, who played Hamlet in these radio programs, mentioned it in his autobiography published in 2018. Kume died in 2021 and left full text of this script, which I have, luckily enough, an opportunity to read through, and I found that it shows a very interesting feature and may urge us to reconsider the history of Japanese Shakespeare translation. This radio program was broadcast on 22nd of August in 1956, one of the first 9 series of Shakespeare radio productions. The 4 programs are as shown. We could see this script from these points. One, whether this script was influenced by Fukuda Tsuneari's version. Also, whether this script reflected the editing of John Dover Wilson's New Cambridge Shakespeare series, which is known as the main source of Fukuda's translation, and even Kinoshita himself would follow in his later translations. 2. Why Kinoshita made a strange word choice for this script, especially in Hamlet's first soliloquy. Kinoshita's Hamlet was broadcast soon after Fukuda Tsuneari translated and directed his Hamlet in 1955 for the Bungakuza Theatre Company. And this script was published in the same year. Fukuda's Hamlet has been regarded as the first great success of the post-World War II Shakespeare productions in Japan. His direction was very clear-cut and action ran very fluently, which left strong impact upon Japanese audience. A main driving force and resources of Fukuda's Hamlet is said to be the one produced by the Old Vic Theatre, directed by Michael Bento, starring Richard Burton. Fukuda had seen it in 1955, and it was so provocative for Fukuda that he followed faithfully the impact of this production he received. Fukuda admits that the reputation he achieved for his Hamlet is derived from the achievement of Bento's one for the most part. As well as the impact of this production, Fukuda's translation had a good reputation. His line, supported by the simple and strong word choice, gave a sort of fluency upon the production. It is known as the first successful one under the strong influence of John Dover Wilson's New Cambridge editions used in Bento's production, which he had edited according to his own realistic reading of original text and had been appreciated widely all over the world then. One of the typical features of Wilson's editing can be seen in his word choice. To take a famous example, Wilson proposed to substitute the important word of the first monologue, soliloquy, "Oh, that two-tooth solid flesh would melt," for "Oh, that this two-tooth solid flesh would melt," and which he thought is not appropriate to depict Hamlet's own agony. Here, I don't mention the background of this substitution, But there was a very unique analysis based on the comparison of the folio and photo text. Naturally, Fukuda followed this Wilson's principle in his translation. Also, Wilson added some stage directions. Which he thought are needed to explain the psychology of characters. Famous one is the direction of Hamlet's action in Act 2, Scene 2. In this scene, Wilson made Hamlet enter twice. First one is when he enters the scene, Hamlet happens to overhear Claudius and Polonius talk about how to confirm the intention of marry Hamlet, and decided to make Ophelia to speak to him. Once Hamlet leaves here, and when Claudius and Polonius exit the stage, he appears again before Ophelia. This adding of stage directions would certainly make it easy to understand the psychology of Hamlet and the outburst of his emotion before Ophelia. Though this drastic editing had been criticized in the second half of the 20th century, Wilson's edition was widely appreciated at that time, and Fukuda blindly followed his editing when he translates Shakespeare. But it is a sort of contradiction that Fukuda, who stubbornly tried to avoid the psychology-oriented acting and urged actors to speak and act very quickly, relies heavily on Wilson's psychologism, which is a topic to be examined on another occasion. Anyway, Kinoshita's Hamlet was broadcast soon after the sensation Fukuda brought about. So it is natural that Kinoshita mirrors Fukuda's and Wilson's view into his text. But he didn't. As I mentioned, a main driving force and this script is abbreviated radically because it is Kinoshita's script is abbreviated radically because it is only 2-hour program. Kinoshita did not only omit the lines and scenes, but also substitute new phrase for originals in many scenes. Hamlet enters only once in Act 2, Scene 2, but it may be not mean by that he rejected Wilson's view. In radio broadcasting, it means literally that Hamlet enters the scene without saying anything. The voiceover narration may also help in this case, but there are few narrations in this script. In addition to these alterations, he did not adopt solid form of the first soliloquy, i.e. he rejected Wilson's view, but strangely, he also rejected solid, i.e. he didn't go back to the editions before Wilson's. Indeed, instead, Kinoshita gave the word どうにもならぬ here, which means uncontrollable. As a for, 演じたいこのどうにもならぬ俺の肉体。As a for, this script is quite unique. It has no similar character with the other contemporary translations, and it shares almost nothing with his later Hamlets. In 1971 translations, Kinoshita admits that he adopted Wilson's view mainly. Here, Hamlet begins his first monologue with cursing his too salary flesh, and he appears twice in Act 2, Scene 2. The same treatment as Fukuda's. So, at least in this 1971 version, Kinoshita himself was not in a position to against Wilson. But in 1988, Kinoshita totally revised all his translations of Shakespeare's work, and in this version, the influence from Wilson was swept away completely. Hamlet curses his solid body, and in Act 2, Scene 2, he enters only once. What urged Kinoshita makes this revision is unclear. So this may be also another topic to be explored on another occasion. Going back to the topic of 1955 script, The question arises here. Why Kinoshita made this strange arrangement to his script? Possible assumption around this alteration may be: 1. Kinoshita did not know Wilson's editing, nor he did not care about Wilson. 2. Kinoshita did not know much about the information of Fukuda's production either. But both assumptions might not be probable. As for question 1, it is almost impossible Kinoshita did not have a chance to know Wilson's view. He had already published the translation of Othello in 1946, but Dover Wilson's edition of Othello was not published. It was published in 1957. He was not familiar with Wilson's Othello at that time. But he had learned English literature at Department of English Literature of Tokyo University during the wartime under the supervising of Nakano Yoshio, distinguished scholar of English literature and known as a leader of Shakespeare studies at that time. In this circumstance, Kinoshita must have learned a pile of many academic results of predecessors, including Wilson, and clear evidence that he knew Wilson is seen on the margin of this broadcast script. Kume Akira made a short notes on the margin of page 93, and it reads, Hamlet's A2 S2 overhearing King and Polonius, Dover Wilson's interpretation. 王ポロニアスの話の立ち聞きのこと、ドーバー・ウィルソンの解釈という、Kume put this in memorandum. So, unmistakably, it refers to Hamlet's two entering of the scene. And Kume must have put it when someone talked about it during the rehearsal time. And it is natural to think that this someone must be Kinoshita himself. He must have talked about Wilson's interpretation before the actors. This illustrates Kinoshita was certainly familiar with Wilson's view. And also question 2, there is one episode which shows Kinoshita was heavily aware of Fukuda's production. According to his autobiography, Kume Akira confessed that he himself was strongly influenced by Fukuda's production. Especially, he was moved by the acting of Akutagawa Hiroshi, actor and director, playing Hamlet under Fukuda's direction. And Kume admitted that he imitated unconsciously Akutagawa's way of speaking lines. When Okakura Shiro, director of the Budou no Kai, a theater company Kume and Kinoshita belonged to, said to Kume jokingly, "Did you steal the Akutagawa's way?" But not Kume, but Kinoshita reacted to him very seriously. That was Kume's way, not Akutagawa's one. This unexpected reaction of Kinoshita was Kume's suspect because he had strong sense of rivalry against Fukuda. Kinoshita might not want to admit the influence of Fukuda's production upon his Hamlet. Judging from this episode, in 1956 broadcast script, Kinoshita's rejections of Wilson's edition might be an effect of his rejection of Fukuda's production. He did not want to follow Wilson as Fukuda did, but did not want to be thought he doesn't know Wilson, so he rejected both solid and stylish in his script. Luckily, there is a radio program which disappears soon after the program ends, and no perspective to be published after that. So he adapted it as he wishes. Of course, these are only assumptions. But there is similar interesting topic around Kinoshita's 1956 script, which maybe give light upon his rivalry he had against Fukuda. It is the famous to be or not to be soliloquy in Act 3, Scene 1. Kinoshita first gave Japanese 生きる死ぬそれが問題だ To live or to die, that is the question to this line. But Kume drew a cancel line upon the first two words and put a revised line. 生き続けるか、それとも死か which means, if we make a translation of translation, means to keep on living or to die. This must be a revision made during the rehearsal, and this revised line was delivered on the broadcast. But why Kinoshita made this correction is unclear. Both lines are not so different from each other. Rather, the first one is the faithful translation of the original Shakespeare text. But if we compare the line with the one that Fukuda translated previous year, we find quite clear similarity between those two. Fukuda translated as せいかしかそれが問題だ, which if we translate back to English, i.e. make a subtext of its outcome, the outcome would be almost the same as Kinoshita's 生きる死ぬそれが問題だ. If Kinoshita noticed this similarity during the rehearsal time, he might have thought he had to paraphrase it to erase the unconscious influence he received from Fukuda's. Again, this is only an assumption, but for the time being, we can conclude as as I mentioned earlier, Kinoshita would go back to Wilson's view and his editing when he translated Hamlet again in 1971. This shows Kinoshita must have been admiring Wilson's achievement to some extent. But there appears a sort of complicated way to accept it if we would consider Kinoshita's first unknown version of Hamlet. Especially, we cannot help feeling the untold impact of Fukuda's translation, even it would be criticized along with Wilson's editions later. And this also leads us to the counterfactual assumption. If Kinoshita had finished full translation of Hamlet after this broadcast program, this must be a quite unique and stimulating Hamlet in any case, which may urge us to reconsider the strange stage history of the post-World War II Japanese Hamlet. That's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Inoue. Okay, now I'm delighted to be introducing Reiko Ishibuchi from Waseda University. Those who joined the tour yesterday to the museum theater, may remember her strong leadership and the umbrella she was holding. Anyway, she works on English Renaissance theater and culture. And today she's going to speak on the topic of, Kazuko Matsuoka and her translation of All's Well That Ends Well, with special references to the representations of Countess Russian.
Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you for a generous introduction, Professor Ashizu. I am Rieko Ishibuchi from the Tsubouchi Memorial Theatre Museum, and the title of my presentation is Kazuko Matsuoka and her translations of All's Well That Ends Well, with special references to the representation of the Countess of Russian. Okay. All's Well That Ends Well is one of the least translated Shakespeare's plays in Japan. In contrast to Hamlet, which has more than 40 translations, All's Well has only 4. In 1927, Shoyo Tsubouchi translated this play for the first time in Japan. Following Shoyo's translation, Akio Kuro's translation was published in 1966. Yushi Odashima published his translation in 1983. In 2020, finally, Kazuko Matsuoka finished translating All's Well. The play was performed only 12 times in Tokyo since 1980, including the recent production of the Sai-no-Kuni Shakespeare series in 2021. In the translator's word, Shoyo regards this play as inappropriate for the public performance because it is incompatible with their ideals and taste in terms of its plot, especially in terms of its morality. Such incompatibilities might have resulted from Shakespeare's portrayal of women who suffered from social norms in order to achieve their goals, their desires. It is often said that one of the characteristics of Matsuoka's translation is her focus on female autonomy, being the first Japanese woman that completed her translations of all the 37 Shakespeare's plays into Japanese. Hiroyuki Kondo evaluates Matsuoka's translation as a feminist corrective to the previous masculine translations, while reminding us that Matsuoka's emphasis on simplicity and her modesty are sometimes incompatible with the formulation of feminist translations. In fact, Matsuoka's translation still keeps so-called feminine expressions. For instance, she uses sentence-ending particles called shujoshi in Japanese, such as yo, nano, noyo, wane. Nevertheless, her Japanese tend to avoid excessively polite expressions at the end of a sentence, such as desu no, orimasu no, itadaki to zonjimasu, gozaimasu, as well as expressions which remind readers and audiences of female characters or even a translator's age, such as nani nani shite okure, or nani nani no kai, or nani nani no dai. One of the aims of Matsuoka's translation is, according to her, to translate female characters' speeches as natural as possible for contemporary Japanese audiences. This paper will explore Matsuoka's translations of All's Well That Ends Well, focusing on the representation of the Countess of Russion in terms of her languages as a mother. Comparing Matsuoka's translation with those by her male predecessors, such as those by Shoyo, Kudo, and Odashima, the paper will discuss how different they are in terms of the use of language by the Countess Russian, and what the difference might be in the history of Shakespeare translations in Japan. As Matsuoka writes in her Translators Afterword for All's Well, published by Chikuma Shobo in 2021, it is unusual from the viewpoint of Shakespeare's representations of female characters. The heroine, Helen, is so-called a career woman who pursues her career as a doctorship. Moreover, as Susan Gossett and Helen Wilcox note, All's Well is the first of only 2 plays in the Shakespeare canon to open with a speech by a woman. It is with the speech of the Countess of Russion that the play opens. It is also noteworthy that the Countess is the Shakespeare's original character who doesn't appear in his source, the 38th tale in Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, translated into English by William Painter as The Palace of Pleasure in 1566. She is characterized as a mother to Bertram and a mother-in-law, future mother-in-law to Helen. It is unusual in Shakespeare's plays that such an aged woman, especially mother, plays an important role. Scholars often refer to the absence of a mother in King Lear, for example. As the play is called a problem play, it deals with the complex issues such as relationships between older and younger generations the rich and the poor, and men and women. There is an Italian war in the dramatic context. However, what lies under the whole play is the issue of succession. All of dramatic events, such as the French king's illness, Helen's medical prescription left by her father, the rings descended in the Russian family, Helen's bed trick, all relate to the issue of succession. A dialogue between the Countess and Helen in Act 1, Scene 3 is important when thinking about this issue and the Countess' language as a mother. The Countess hears from Rinaldo, her man of affairs, that Helen is in love with her son Bertram. Then she tries to get confirmed by Helen of her love. This quotation is taken from the third art in Shakespeare and emphasis on mine. Quote, "You know, Helen, I am a mother to you. My honorable mistress, now a mother. Why not a mother? When I said a mother, methought you saw a serpent. What's in mother that you stare at it? I say I am your mother, and put you in the catalogue of those that were in room mine. This often seen adoption strives with nature, and choice breeds a native slip to us from foreign seas. You ne'er oppressed me with a mother's groan, yet I express to you a mother's care." In this passage, the Countess repeats the term mother 8 times. I underline the term mother in the quotation on your screen. In order to show her mother's care, she tells Helen to put her in the catalogue of those that she will wound. The term wound means, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, to hold or to place in the womb. Interestingly, this use in All's Well is the first reference in the Oxford English Dictionary, and now this word itself is obsolete. When considering Helen's future, the word has a symbolic meaning. Because she becomes a mother who enwomb Bertram's child at the end of the play. In other words, Helen succeeds the position of the Countess. Matsuoka is the only translator that literally follows Shakespeare's vocabulary in this scene. On one hand, all male translators, Shoyo, Kudo, Odashima, interpret the term enwombed as equivalent to give birth. For instance, in Japanese, Shoyo translates the sentence as 私はあんたを私の産んだ者たちの名簿中に記入しています。While Kudo's translation is the second quotation, 私が産んだ者たちの名簿の中にあなたを記入しています。The third quotation, Odashima also writes as follows, 私が産んだ者たちの名簿の中にあなたの名前もちゃんと記入してあります。All of their translations mean, I include you, Helen, in the catalogue of those I gave birth. On the other hand, Matsuoka translates the sentence as follows, 私はあなたの母親、あなたのお腹に宿った者たちの名簿に、あなたは私のお腹に宿った者たちの名簿に載せてあります。To enwomb is different from to give birth, of course. The former is the state of pregnancy, while the latter is its consequence. So male translators might have avoided explicit expressions about female pregnancy. Matsuoka writes a lot of notes in editions she used, her drafts, and true proofs. In the third art in Shakespeare she used, this image is taken from exactly the third art in Shakespeare she used. She circles an expression of mother's care and underlines the mother's groan with her memo about Jintsu in kanji. It's on your right hand side, and also the kanji is a Japanese writing system that uses Chinese symbols. However, there are no revisions or comments about the term en route. The term is on the left page, and I quoted the sentence here, and I made the term yellow. And Matsuoka didn't write any revisions or comments about the term en route, so it might be possible to say that Matsuoka unconsciously translated the term into a literal meaning in Japanese. So my focus here is not that Matsuoka could do what male translators could not because of her experience of pregnancy as a woman. Rather, I would argue that her translation elucidates what it means to enwound a child and how it is related to the issue of succession in the play. It provides readers and audiences with a new interpretation of the text, while also giving actors and directors new possibilities in exploring acting and directorial styles. It is also noteworthy that the line, which includes the word enwound, wasn't cut in a performance text of the Synecdoche Shakespeare series. Maybe a lot of you know, but the Synecdoche Shakespeare series performance text cut a lot of Matsuoka's translation, sometimes changes her translations under her own supervision. But she and the director didn't cut that sentence, which includes the term enwound. So at the end of the story of Shakespeare's source, Giletta, who is Helen's model, present twins just like their father, Beltramo, who is Bartram's model. However, in All's Well, Helen's pregnancy is framed as an ocular proof of their sexual consummation. So the people gathered at Lucian, the audience, only hear Helen's maternal attestation and Bartram's responsibility for it. The above-mentioned term, enwound, is thus important here again, because it leads to the play's ending that seems to end well. All's Well appears to have been originally written early in King James' reign, most probably in late 1605 or early 1606. There was no performance record of the play until 1741. The issue of succession was immensely important for aristocratic men in that period. Gosset and Wilkos, editors of the Third Ade Shakespeare, assumed that Shakespeare would have seen many men like Bartram at the Jacobean court. Among those examples are William Herbert, 3rd Earl of Pembroke, and Henry Risley, 3rd Earl of Southampton. Herbert was dedicatee of Shakespeare's first folio with his younger brother Philip, 4th Earl of Pembroke. Interestingly, his mother, Mary Sidney, the Countess of Pembroke, a sister of Sir Philip Sidney, was a widowed dowager in most of her life. She was a patron of poets and playwrights, including Shakespeare. Recent scholarship of translation studies is cautious to see translation as a silent and marginal form of writing. They began to focus on innovative aspects of translation by rethinking of the very notion of origin or source. Susan Bassett considers a translation as a powerful agent for cultural change. This cultural turn in translation studies resonates with that had happened over a couple of decades in the scholarship of early modern women's writing, which traditionally regarded translation as feminine and secondary. In writing on the English Renaissance, Susan Trill defines that translation is not simply a passive reflection of a previous text, but a form of writing which, by establishing it within a new context, makes a claim about the status of the translated text. For instance, Mary Sidney translated many books, especially the Holy Psalms of David and the French drama Antonius, 1592, written by Robert Gaudier, critics began to look at her translation as a form of her political agency. Cultural context in early modern England and contemporary Japan are of course different, and yet I would suggest that Matsuoka's translation is also a form of her authorship. Her translation of the Countess' language as a mother and the term of a moon leaves open more potentialities for the interpretation of the play itself. Thank you so much for your listening.
Thank you very much. I assume it's okay to run a little bit late, like 5-10 minutes. We have only 5 minutes left at this stage, because we were delayed by the technical issue. I thought it's okay to extend the session just by 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so can I invite any questions, either to the individual speaker or? Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Wu. I'd like to know, it's really fascinating how amazingly the translator has kept all of this poetic style. And I'd quite like to know a little bit about how this might be in performance. Have these texts been performed, and how do they sound in performance? Because literary texts, they're obviously very superior, but I wondered how the actors manage with it.
Right. Okay, thank you for your question. The first, you mean the distance between the original translation in Chinese and its final performance on the stage? I think this is a very, very professional question. The translator has a particular method. That is, after he has finished translating the work, for example, Hamlet, the entire play, he consulted different experts, actors, directors, and professors of Chinese literature to proofread his translation. And in a certain case, there is a certain professor who taught Chinese literature, and she is also a famous writer, writing in the Chinese language, especially in prose. She once corrected more than 200 areas of the translator's translation, because that professor of Chinese language think that the translation is not fluent enough or not close enough to the audience. So she revised, also gives suggestions for revision for more than 200 wordings or phrases. However, the translator has to go through their comments and suggestions again, because sometimes if the translator buys everything given by the other experts consulted by him, he would not be able to stick to the original form of the translation. So he wants to be to achieve a translation that is very performable. So it has to be tested by real experts in this field. But he himself is a scholar of Shakespeare's play, so he knows that there's a certain form that should be remained in the final product. So there's a long process first: study, then translation, then bring to be tested by experts, then take all of their suggestions and go through them and to see which suggestion has to be adopted. And there might be some suggestion not adopted by a translator. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay.
This is just a small question for Professor Ishibuchi. Matsuoka's translation, あなたは私のお腹に宿ったもの. There seems to be a kind of rhyme between anata and onaka. Do you think that's deliberate? Could you say anything about that?
I think you're right. It's really like rhyme in Japanese. And I think one of her translation characteristics is really full of rhyme in Japanese. So, and this sounds like, maybe I feel like this because I'm a Japanese, but it's like kind of nursery, right? And the sound of rhyme really fits to the context, I think. Yeah.
And perhaps also emphasizes the relationship.
Yes. Yes, Helen and the Countess. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All fascinating papers in different aspects, different translators. And then I'd like to ask all three of you some common questions. So that is my question. It's rather general question. And then also I'd like to connect your paper to this morning Jessica's plenary, and then also general theme of this conference, founding translations. So as Chinshi's translations, and Kinoshita's translations, and Matsuoka's translations. So as you're the researcher on this translation, what sort of limitation do you find all the translators' work? And then also, I'd like to ask you, there's anything you found in this their translation, in what way those translations illuminating, maybe this is Shakespeare's, this all three plays in the Hamlet, and two Hamlets, and then all that as well. Sorry, this is not a too general question, but some question to all three of you.
Thank you. So you are asking about what's lost and what's found in the translation.
Anybody first?
Maybe Kinoshita's translation is not so famous in Japan, and I'd like to propose possibilities of Kinoshita's translation in stage production, because as I mentioned in my paper, there are few cases of Kinoshita's production of Kinoshita's translation, but a young director playwright Tami Kenichi told me personally, Kinoshita's translation is so suitable to the stage, and I adopted when I supported the civil Procurator's production of Richard III. He was the assistant director of the production, and he said he proposed to use the Kinoshita's translation, and maybe the production itself was very fascinating, but I'm not so excited about the production. But the possibility of the use of the Kinoshita translation is I admired, and so this is maybe Kinoshita translation is I want more familiar with the Japanese directors and audience, and I'd like to propose this point through my papers, and I found that this is the point I found in my paper, and I'd like to share my opinion to all.
All right, thank you for your great question. Regarding the limitation of Poe's translation of Shakespeare into Chinese, I would say first, perhaps the limitation is about the quantity of his translation. He has so far translated about 5 plays of Shakespeare's work into Chinese. However, before this translator, there was another translator who translated the entire complete works of Shakespeare into Chinese. And however, I would like to say that Peng, as a translator, is not only a translator, he is a scholar, professor of Shakespeare studies. So he kind of surpassed the previous other translators in the past in the study, in academic work. For example, there is a certain wording in Hamlet that is, during the sword fight at the end of the play, when Hamlet is fighting Laertes, Gertrude, the queen, said that my son is fat, F-A-T, fat. And lots of translators of in the past, they translated fat into simply fat, means a bit obese, a sort of fat. But the translator, Peng, as a scholar of Shakespeare studies, he went to did some research about the wording of the words in the Elizabethan period. And he found that the word was used as a synonym of strong at that time. So he translated fat into strong. And in this kind of translation, you can find that the wording of strong is more logical in the translation because Hamlet is a symbol of Renaissance man. It has to be like a philosopher, a thinker, well-learned, very literary, and very strong, very good at sports. So fat as a wording, after research, the translation done by Peng seems to be more professional, more close to the original usage, original meaning by the playwright. And another limitation that so this is not a limitation. This is compared with Peng. Other translators might have a certain limitation because some of them are not really Shakespeare experts. But this translator, Peng, is first a professor, a scholar of Shakespeare studies, and then he became also a translator of Shakespeare's plays. And as for limitation, I would like to point out that sometimes Peng's translation of, in the morning I asked Dr. Chiba a question about the translation of poem, right? Poem, word plays. Those are very, very difficult things to translate. And we have to resort to our human creativity. Different translators might have different association, different creativity, different imagination. So Peng's solution is to resort to his own understanding, research, scholarship, and creativity. He purposely did not read other translators' of works. So for his translation of the puns, special puns, and the word plays, actually I have certain contact with him. He's kind of confident about his own translation, but I would say that his translation of those puns, interesting and very subtle puns or word plays, might not be totally satisfying, okay, as compared with other translators' translation of those very, very interesting and difficult puns and the word plays. Thank you.
Okay, just quickly, I want to think the limitation of the term gender itself in translation, because while it is a groundbreaking work by Matsuoka sensei, I think the definition of women embracing really diversity now, and also it's really difficult to say this is really feminine language and also this is really masculine languages in translations. But now thinking about the casting, for example, there are lots of possibilities in terms of casting. For example, actors of who do not define themselves as kind of women and men. And I am wondering how to cope with that kind of shifting concept or cultural climate in terms of gender to consider the translation work itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Obviously, we need 20 more minutes, but anyway, I have to finish this session. Thank you so much. It's been a great session. We found a lot of bigger issues, not just about individual translators, but we have come to realize there are lots of common, bigger conceptual issues regarding translation. It's a very fruitful occasion. Thank you so much for your participation.